The late afternoon sun cast a warm orange hue over the city of Ouagadougou. Ibrahim Traore, clad in his military fatigues, stood atop a small hill that overlooked the capital. The wind whispered through the branches of the baobab trees, their immense trunks standing tall like silent witnesses to the struggles of history. As a child, Ibrahim had often walked these hills, his feet brushing against the dry earth, a child of humble beginnings, dreaming of a better future. But now, standing at the crossroads of his destiny, the dreams of that boy seemed to weigh heavily on him, like the mantle of leadership itself. The events of the past few months had shaped him into a man of hardened resolve. The revolution that had brought him to power was not a simple coup or the desperate attempt of a few military leaders to seize power. It was the manifestation of a deep yearning within the hearts of the people of Burkina Faso. For years, the country had been subjected to foreign exploitation, political corruption, and a leadership that cared more about personal gain than the welfare of its citizens. The rich natural resources of the country had flowed out of their land like rivers of blood, leaving the people struggling to survive in a harsh world of inequality. Ibrahim had known that something had to change. The country was on the brink of collapse, and it was no longer enough to merely talk about change. He had to act. With the support of a small but dedicated group of soldiers, advisors, and civilians who shared his vision, he had overthrown the previous regime. But the path ahead was far from clear. There were those who would never accept his rule, who would challenge him at every turn. And in the silence of his heart, Ibrahim understood that the real battle was only just beginning. As he gazed down at the sprawling city below, his thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his trusted advisor, Lieutenant Amadou. Amadou was a stocky, no-nonsense man with a deep voice that seemed to reverberate with authority. He had been with Ibrahim from the very beginning, standing by his side through every difficult decision, every painful moment of doubt. "Captain," Amadou said, his voice steady but tinged with concern, "the situation is worsening in the northern provinces. There are reports of armed resistance, and the international community is already beginning to question our legitimacy." Ibrahim turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "And what do you suggest we do?" Amadou shifted uncomfortably, his eyes narrowing. "We need to show strength. The people need to know that we're in control, that we are the ones who will lead them to a new future. If we don't act now, we risk losing everything." Ibrahim was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the horizon. He could feel the weight of his responsibilities pressing on him like a boulder. The revolution was not just about overthrowing a corrupt system. It was about building something new, something that would last for generations. And yet, he knew that this journey would not be without its sacrifices. "I'll do what must be done," Ibrahim said, his voice firm. "But I will not become what I fought against. I will not let this revolution become another dictatorship." Amadou nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The men around Ibrahim had come to rely on him as a symbol of hope, but they also looked to him for strength, and Ibrahim, in turn, knew that the world would be watching. One wrong move could destroy everything they had fought for. As the evening drew to a close, Ibrahim found himself alone on the hill, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He could feel the breeze cool his skin. As the night descended, the stars beginning to twinkle above him like distant promises of hope. The country, still reeling from years of hardship, needed him. The people needed him. And yet, as the leader of this revolution, Ibrahim couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest challenge was yet to come. The air was thick with tension as Ibrahim boarded the commercial flight from Ouagadougou to Paris. It had been a long and exhausting week. negotiations with foreign dignitaries, strategic discussions with his military advisors, and of course, the constant reminders that his revolution was not yet complete. Ibrahim's role as a leader was more than just a position of authority. It was an internal struggle that never ceased. Every day he wrestled with the weight of his country's future and the fear of becoming a tyrant, something he had sworn never to be. The flight was supposed to be a brief escape from the pressures of leadership, a few hours in the sky to clear his mind. But even in the confines of the aircraft, Ibrahim could feel the eyes of the world upon him. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, and the pressure to live up to that symbolism was immense. Ibrahim settled into his seat, adjusting his uniform as he glanced around the cabin. The other passengers were lost in their own worlds, some reading newspapers, others staring at their phones, the hum of the engines filling the background. Ibrahim could hear the flight attendants moving down the aisle, their footsteps a soft rhythm against the linoleum floor. It was then that he encountered the flight attendant. She was young, with a bright smile and a nervous energy that seemed to fill the space between them. As she approached his row, her eyes lingered on his uniform for a moment, and then she looked at him, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to a hint of disbelief. "Excuse me, Captain," she said, her voice soft and polite but laced with an almost teasing tone. "Are you sure you're supposed to be sitting here?" The words cut through the air like a dagger. Ibrahim's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, sensing the unspoken judgment in her gaze. She hadn't meant to insult him, but in that moment she had reminded him of the many who had underestimated him, those who had dismissed him as a mere soldier, a man unworthy of leading a nation. He had experienced this time and again in his life, from the dusty streets of Ouagadougou to the cold corridors of power. For a brief moment, Ibrahim considered ignoring her, letting the remark pass like so many others. But something inside him stirred. He had spent his life fighting for the dignity of his people, for a future where they would no longer be looked down upon. He could not let this moment go unnoticed. Without a word, Ibrahim rose from his seat, towering over the young woman. His eyes locked with hers, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I am not just a man in a seat," Ibrahim said, his voice low but filled with quiet strength. "I am the leader of a revolution. I am the hope of my people." The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was silence. The flight attendant, startled by the intensity of his response, took a step back. She opened her mouth to speak, but found no words. Ibrahim turned away and moved down the aisle, his every step echoing in the stillness of the cabin. He could feel the weight of the moment, the air thick with the recognition that this was not just about one man's pride, it was about the dignity of a nation. As the plane descended into Paris, Ibrahim leaned back in his seat, the cool metal of the armrest pressing against his palms. The city stretched out below him, a sprawling metropolis filled with people from every corner of the world. To Ibrahim, Paris was both a symbol of the world's power and a reminder of the divide that existed between the rich and the poor, the powerful and the oppressed. He had often wondered what it would be like to stand on the other side of history, to be the one in control. But now that he had achieved power, the weight of it felt suffocating. Every decision, every move he made would be scrutinized. The revolution had been born out of a desire for freedom, but Ibrahim understood that true freedom came with great responsibility. As the plane touched down, Ibrahim's mind returned to the challenges that lay ahead. The flight had been a temporary respite, but the real work awaited him. And as he stepped off the plane, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the eyes of the world and the people of Burkina Faso were upon him, he knew that the true test of his leadership was just beginning. The flight attendant, now standing near the exit, watched him as he walked past. Her earlier hesitation had been replaced by a sense of respect, though unspoken. Ibrahim's words had left a mark on her, as they had on so many others. In the distance, the lights of Paris twinkled like stars, but to Ibrahim they held no promise of escape. There was only the unyielding call of duty, the voices of his people echoing in his mind, and the realization that the road ahead would not be easy. But Ibrahim Traore was not a man who feared the storm. He was the storm. Ibrahim Traore's feet hit the cold Parisian tarmac, the rhythmic crunch of his boots against the pavement providing an unsettling contrast to the overwhelming silence inside his mind. His fingers brushed the lapel of his uniform, the fabric cool under his touch as he adjusted it. The hum of the busy airport, the murmur of languages unfamiliar to his ears, filled the space around him. But to Ibrahim, the cacophony of voices seemed distant, muted by the weight of the thoughts pressing down on his chest. The smell of jet fuel lingered in the air, mingling with the sterile scent of the terminal. As he walked toward the baggage claim, the sharp tang of metal and oil reminded him of the battles, the uprisings, and the bitter taste of revolution. The adrenaline from the fight for Burkina Faso's freedom had not left him. It never would. It was woven into the fabric of his soul, a fire that could never be extinguished. But this time, there was something different. The crowd that shuffled past him barely spared a glance, as if the mere presence of a man like Ibrahim was commonplace, something not even worth noticing. A faint sneer tugged at his lips, but he suppressed it, the bitterness sinking deep within him. Ibrahim had come to Paris for a purpose, a mission that was both political and personal. For months, he had been negotiating with foreign dignitaries, attempting to secure Burkina Faso's place in the world. But this was not a simple diplomatic mission. Ibrahim had heard whispers of betrayal, of deals being struck behind closed doors. The world that looked at him now was the same world that had turned a blind eye to the suffering of his people. To the west, Burkina Faso had always been just another piece on the chessboard of geopolitics. As Ibrahim walked through the terminal, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The eyes of the world were always upon him now, always waiting for him to falter. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as his mind raced. "How many times must we prove ourselves?" he muttered under his breath. "Captain Traore?" A voice interrupted his thoughts, pulling him back into the present. He turned to face the speaker. A woman stood before him, her features sharp and her posture stiff. She was dressed in a sharp suit, the kind that could only belong to someone who had spent years in the corridors of power. Her presence was commanding, but there was no warmth in her gaze, only the calculated professionalism of a diplomat. "Yes?" Ibrahim replied, his tone colder than he intended, but he didn't have the energy to hide the strain in his voice. "I'm Clara Dubois, an advisor with the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was sent to escort you to the meeting." Her voice was firm, her accent crisp. There was no mistaking the authority in her tone, yet Ibrahim could sense the subtle undercurrent of skepticism. She had already judged him, without even speaking the words. He could see it in her eyes, the same skepticism that had followed him throughout his life. Ibrahim gave a curt nod. "Lead the way." As they walked through the terminal, Clara fell into step beside him, her heels clicking against the marble floors. The contrast between them was stark. He, the revolutionary leader, a man who had fought against oppression. She, the representative of a foreign government that had stood by and watched as Burkina Faso bled under corrupt regimes. And yet, both of them were part of the same global system, a system Ibrahim had vowed to dismantle. "You have a very unconventional approach to leadership, Captain," Clara said after a long silence. She was trying to be polite, but her curiosity was evident. "Your country, it seems, has entered a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty." Ibrahim glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. "Uncertainty is the cost of freedom. For far too long, my people lived in the shadow of fear and corruption. Now we must chart our own path, no matter how difficult that may be. Clara seemed to contemplate his words, but her expression remained unreadable. And how do you intend to build trust with the international community? The world has been hesitant to accept your rise to power. Ibrahim stopped in his tracks, his gaze fixed on the horizon outside the glass doors. The cold Parisian wind swept through the terminal as the doors slid open, and for a moment Ibrahim felt a pang of nostalgia for his homeland. The dry winds of Burkina Faso, the golden sands of the Sahel, the cries of children playing in the streets. He missed it all. "The world doesn't get to decide our fate," Ibrahim said, his voice low but unwavering. "We do. I didn't take power for my own benefit. I took it because the people demanded change, and no matter what the world thinks, we will forge our own destiny." Clara studied him for a moment longer, her lips pressed together in a thin line. It was clear she was not accustomed to hearing such defiance from African leaders. She expected submission, politeness, and a willingness to conform to the West's dictates. But Ibrahim was different. His revolution was not born from a desire for power. It was born from the desire to break free, to stand on equal footing with the rest of the world. Clara cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Well, Captain, let's get to the meeting. I believe the minister is expecting us." As they walked toward the car, Ibrahim couldn't help but think of the many battles that lay ahead. The world would never give him a free pass. No, he would have to earn their respect, just as he had earned the respect of the people who fought beside him. And that, he knew, would be the hardest part. Back in Ouagadougou, the streets were alive with the pulse of the revolution. It had been several weeks since Ibrahim's rise to power, but the scars of the old regime were still visible in every corner of the city. The people had suffered long enough under the corrupt leadership of the former government, and they looked to Ibrahim as their savior, a man who would lead them to a new future. But even in the midst of this newfound hope, there was still resistance. Some sectors of the military, loyal to the old guard, refused to accept Ibrahim's leadership. Rumors of sabotage and assassination plots filled the air like a poison, and Ibrahim knew that the real battle was just beginning. One afternoon, as Ibrahim sat in his office, his military advisors gathered around him, their faces tense with concern, he felt the weight of their fears bearing down on him. "We can't afford to wait any longer," Lieutenant Amadou said, his face etched with worry. "The loyalists are growing bolder. If we don't take action now, they will tear this country apart." Ibrahim looked out the window, his eyes scanning the city below. It was a city he had fought for, a city he had sworn to protect. But he knew that protecting it would mean making difficult choices, choices that could break his spirit and the spirit of those who followed him. "The people trust us," Ibrahim said, his voice steady, but tinged with the burden of the decision he was about to make. "We can't let fear dictate our actions. We must show the world and our people that we are ready to lead, not with violence, but with resolve." His advisors exchanged uncertain glances. They had fought for the revolution, but now, with the reality of leadership setting in, the stakes were higher than ever. But Ibrahim knew that he couldn't falter. He had promised to lead with honor, and he would keep that promise, even if it cost him everything. Paris had been a blur of meetings, handshakes, and polite nods. Ibrahim had spent hours in discussions with European leaders, trying to secure diplomatic recognition for his government. But every moment had been filled with tension. Every smile, every handshake felt like a performance, one in which Ibrahim had to prove that he was not just another dictator, but a leader of a people who had fought for their right to exist. As he sat alone in his hotel room that evening, his mind wandered back to the flight attendant's teasing words. It had seemed so trivial at the time, but now it felt like a reflection of the bigger battle he faced, a battle not just for Burkina Faso's future, but for the recognition of his people as equals in a world that had long ignored them. The weight of his role as a leader pressed down on him, but Ibrahim refused to let it break him. He had come this far, and he would not stop now. He would continue to fight for the dignity of his people, for their right to be seen and heard. He took a deep breath, standing up from the chair by the window. The lights of Paris glistened below him, but his thoughts were far away. In the distance, he could hear the faint hum of a city alive with opportunity, but his heart belonged to the people of Burkina Faso. And he would return to them, stronger than ever.